if it leads toward more Hiroshimas, more Nagasaki's, possibilities of nuclear holocaust, which are tied to scientific innovation and breakthrough as well, then we've got to be honest about both sides of this debate. And that's why, for me, I'm suspicious of both centralized forms across the board. I've always been a decentralizing kind of person when it comes to centralized power, be it in the economy, be it in the state.
Wait, we haven't started yet. No, we have started, but come on. Look who just came in. Oh, you can't see us.
No, I can't see your wonderful face. Now, is it LaJuan? Is that?
That's it.
Yeah.
That is LaJuan, everybody. I want you to know, if you don't know already, this is my lovely wife, LaJuan, and she's a big fan of brother Cornel West and is happy to be able to greet him here at the beginning of our conversation.
Well, I'm a fan of both of y'all and loving y'all, and I'm giving you a hug so big that it embraces both of y'all.
Well, we appreciate it. See you later. Okay. Take care. All right. We're on the way to Glenn Show. This is the Glenn Show, Substack.com, YouTube. I'm sponsored by the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, where you might not be surprised to learn, Cornel, that they're not exactly jumping for joy that you're running for president. I'm with Cornel West. Cornel West, the iconic social critic, public intellectual, philosopher, theologian. He's professor at the Union Theological Seminary. He's taught at Harvard and Princeton and is known throughout the world for his books, for his activism, for his testimony, his witness, his prophetic witness. He'll tell you that himself. And I'm just very glad to be sharing the microphone with brother Cornel West. So welcome to the Glenn Show, Cornel.
Brother, you know I'm always blessed to be in conversation with you. We've been in conversation now decade after decade. I recall you writing a 10-page single-space response to an essay I did in 1984, 5 hours in New Haven. And then as now, I was always impressed by the power of your intellect and your brilliance and your challenge and your courage. And though we have deep disagreements here and deep agreements there, that we are two brothers, you from the south side of Chicago and me from the chocolate side of Sacramento, brother.
Do you remember, I think it was Owen Fisk who invited me to Yale Legal Theory Workshop in like 1985. And you, and if I'm not mistaken, Adolph Reed were in the audience when I held forth in my Reagan-esque, our dear friend, the late Martin Kilson, the late great Martin Kilson, he was calling me what he called me, pathetic black mascot of the right. Lord only knows what Adolph was saying after a couple of drinks. I don't know. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. Because Owen Fisk.
That was like 1985.
1985. Legal Theory Workshop, man. With Anthony Krongman and Dean Guido. We had some great times in those days, man.
Guido Calabrese, yeah.
Definitely. But you held your own, though, brother. You really did. You held your own. And it was, we were coming at you in a lot of different ways, but you held your own. For me, it was just a beautiful thing. I think that kind of serious Socratic dialogue is necessary.
Let's have it then, Cornel. Let's have it. You're running for president. I'm trying to get my mind around that. I know you're now the second friend of mine who has run for president. I have to mention Larry Kotlikoff because he was best man at my wedding. He was chairman of the economics department at BU when I went over there in 1991, and we're dear, dear close friends. And he ran in 2016, a quick-sighted campaign, thinking that being a smart economist, which he is, was good enough to lead the country. And I told him being a smart economist is a good thing, but it's not exactly good enough to lead the country. If that's all you got, bro. And I got to ask you this question. You are a brilliant and profound social thinker. You are an intellectual and a man of ideas. You are a prophetic witness on behalf of ideals that you embrace. But what do you think makes you fit to run the country?
Well, I just think now that we're at such a low point, we're at such a nadir, that when I looked around and tried to find certain voices that I thought were fundamentally committed to truth and justice, and especially focus on poor and working people, that I might be able to be of service, both to the beloved community as well as to the my fellow citizens. Because you can imagine, I've said before, you'd find me in a crack house before you find me in the White House. I've said it many occasions because the White House has been tied to so much corruption and war crimes abroad, be it Vietnam or Iraq or other places. But I do feel a certain calling to allow the legacy that has shaped me of Martin King and Rabbi Heschel and Dorothy Day and Edward Said, and it goes on, Grace Lee Boggs and a host of others, to allow that prophetic legacy to spill over, my brother, to spill over into electoral politics. Because I'm thoroughly convinced that there is a best of America, and I want to reintroduce America to the best of itself. And the best of itself is people of integrity, honesty, courage, who are fundamentally committed to the least of these poor and working people. And we'll see. I'm not naive about this, nor am I pessimistic about this. When you're bearing witness, there's a joy in struggling for justice. There's a joy.
Yeah, you froze up on me. I hope you haven't been sitting. But we got you. We got
Did
you
it
on your
freeze
side.
up?
So no. Let's continue. Let's keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't your fault.
Did you
It's.
Oh, okay.
I think we're going to be okay. I think we need to just keep going. You were just making a statement explaining what the motivations were for you to try to give voice to a certain kind of moral witness in
That's right.
running for president. Uh, but okay, so the but is it's the government of the United States of America. It's a massive, massive thing.
That's true.
And you can't get anything done by yourself. You say prefer to be in a crack house than in the White House, but I mean, the White House is not actually running the show, not on its own. It's providing some direction, but it's not. It's at the pinnacle of a massive bureaucratic structure. There are all kinds of political forces that are at play. I mean, you got the other party, you got the Congress, you got the courts, you got the et cetera. And again, with respect, with great respect, is it not a quixotic enterprise, and one where it's full of symbolism, but where it doesn't actually touch the ground? How are things going to be made better in virtue of this candidacy? You're not going to win. Excuse me, with respect.
You never know. You never know, brother. It's hard to say. Biden's getting older. Trump might drop. The mediocre folk on the Republican side. The Democrats have very little. You never know how God works and how history proceeds, but you're right. The chances don't look good. Again, I'm not naive about this thing. But you have to keep this in mind, that first, I see you have a certain prejudice towards Cervantes' great Don Quixote. I
prejudice
don't
toward what?
Don
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
A prejudice against the great Cervantes character, Don Quixote.
Okay.
To use that quixotic as if it's a pejorative thing. You notice in that novel, Quixote actually stands for a certain kind of heroicism given an empire that's in deep decline. And it's tied to the chivalry and so forth, but he actually has a certain integrity and a certain source of appeal. Now, in a utilitarian world, the quixotic is pejorative because it's only about consequences. It's only about immediate results. You know what I mean? Whereas and I know that, we come from a tradition where the invisible and the immeasurable, the spiritual and the moral, sometimes have as much effect as the utilitarian and the instrumental. And so it is in Cervantes' novel as well. And so I run for the presidency trying to ensure first that there is a public debate and public conversation that focuses on those you spent so much time on in the last 20 years or so, those in mass incarceration, those you spent time on in your whole intellectual life, those in the hood and the ghettos and so forth. And then how that's connected to, the military industrial complex and the imperial presence of 800 military bases around the world and U.S. troops in over 150 countries, how that's connected to not having enough resources to deal with the elimination of poverty and homelessness, to deal with decent housing, to deal with quality schools, to deal with health care for all, and then to deal with those personal and spiritual issues you've always been concerned about, often associated with personal responsibility, which is stronger families, stronger civic institutions, so people can straighten their backs up and try to be persons of character. So that for me, in that sense, it's a joy to be in it, and it's a pain to be in it because it's a mess. You are right about that. But we shall see. We shall see.
Let me ask you directly then. I mean, you are talking about some real stuff here. What's the connection between American empire, quote unquote, American militarism, and the moral and spiritual crisis of the inner cities of the country and the behavioral problems and the loss of kind of the thread of the spiritual thread of dignity and so on that you've also written about? What's the connection between those things? Or I'll just leave it at that. How do you see them as connected?
Yeah. No, it's a very important question. I mean, a lot of social scientists would talk about it in terms of more money for guns and not enough money for butter, more money for military spending, not enough money for programs that would enhance the plight of the poor. We saw it in the debt ceiling agreement, for example. You still expand the military and you have to provide certain work requirements to gain access to government's resources. But for me, it's a much deeper issue. It's what Brother Martin meant when he said the bombs that drop in Vietnam fall in ghettos, barrios, reservations, poor white communities. And that's not simply a monetary issue. It's not simply financial. It has to do with a militarism abroad that strikes back, and you end up with militarizing within your own country. Look at the Cop City debate going on right now in Atlanta, 11-4. Mainly black folk, Democrats, black Democratic mayor calling for more militarization. We saw the militarization of the police intensify under Barack Obama and under Eric Holder. The militarizing sensibilities that are more and more manifest with the gun violence. Violence is the first thing to go to anytime you're feeling down as a first resort to conflict. You militarize abroad. You think you can invade Iraq and kill 500,000 people, not say a mumbling word about an Iraqi life, when an Iraqi life has exactly the same value as an American life. You think you can go to war in Vietnam and in Afghanistan for 20 years, spend trillions of dollars, and think that doesn't have some impact on the spirit and soul of your nation? And we can go on in that regard. The invasions and occupations of so many other places. It could be in Panama, Grenada, and so forth and so forth, so on. So there is a spiritual connection between being an empire where, what is the military expenditure of the United States is more than the next 10 countries combined. You say, well, my God. We've got a connection between domestic and foreign policy at a moral and spiritual level that strikes back at us. So when we begin to think more and more, it really is just about military might. We're right back to Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic, where Socrates has to respond to Thrasymachus, what? Might does not make right. Power does not dictate morality. And if all we have is military power, if all we have is might, then we're just not just another empire. There's been what, about 70? I think Niall Ferguson tells us it's been about 70 empires going back to Africa. And we're the 68th. And we know all empires come and go. They come and go. Why? Because of military overreach, corruption of elites, citizens feeling helpless and powerless, turning on each other, scapegoating the most vulnerable rather than confronting the most powerful. Here comes the legacy of Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer. Here comes Ella Baker saying what? We are as American as those American bombs, just like Louis Armstrong and Aretha Franklin and Curtis Mayfield are as American as those American bombs. America, you need to be reintroduced to the best of yourself. That's what this candidacy is about. One moment, like a wave, a little small wave in an ocean. It goes all the way back to Harriet Tubman. It goes all the way back to Frederick Douglass. It goes all the way back to the Loury family on the south side of Chicago. And we ain't got to the church life yet.
All right. Let me interrupt. That was a soliloquy and a half. And it shows your genius at work, your oratorical genius, and the depth of your spiritual commitment and your vision. And I'm just wondering what makes me. Let's suppose I'm, a white guy running a small company in the middle of Ohio, Indiana, Nebraska, somewhere.
Yes,
I vote Republican, but I don't necessarily feel good about it. I love my country, whatever I mean by that. I love my God. I'm a straight arrow. And I'm listening to your prophetic witness, and what I see is a radical. I see, I'm sorry, a Marxist. That's what they're going to say. I see a guy who shows up, ambulance chaser, like, excuse me, with respect, but that's what they're going to say at every demonstration with a protest sign, and who's going to spout this rhetoric. What I know, I just want you to respond to this. What I know is that the world is a dangerous place, that there are forces at work other than American empire that necessarily don't mean my grandchildren any good. That hard calls have to be made when they fly planes into office towers. Things have to be done in response to that. Of course, there are questions about what's wise, but to adopt a posture with an armchair posture, again, this is the voice of this guy, I want you to respond to it, of castigating the American project to court because, quote, we have made mistakes, close quote. When I know that the defeat of the Nazis in the Second World War was the right side winning. I know that the retirement of the arsenal of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics actually advanced human freedom in the largest sweep of history, notwithstanding the fact that the United States has done things to set human freedom back.
right.
But please talk to me. Don't talk at me. Tell me why it is that I should be persuaded by this radical vision that you're giving such eloquent voice to.
So at first, I would start with the precious white brother that you noted. I would say that there's the best in us and there's the worst in us. I would say that I'm fundamentally concerned about his situation and predicament. And I would say I want to learn and listen just as I have something to say to him. He has something to say to me. I would say he is who he is because somebody loved him. I am who I am because somebody loved me. And therefore, I'm concerned about his access to a job with a living wage. I'm access to safe neighborhood. I'm access to health care, access to quality education for him and his children. And that we have much in common because we're part of a project of living in the United States. And the United States has its worst, which is its imperial presence abroad, let alone all of the various forms of domination. And America has its best. Those who resisted it and those who preserved their dignity and resilience in the face of it. So I would put myself on a human level. That's why I'm going to spend some good time going into Trump country, brother. I approach each person not as a stereotype, not as some kind of construct, but as a very precious human being who has their own lens through which they view the world. And I have my lens through which I view the world. And we attempt to come together and see where we overlap. I mean, you're right, it is a dangerous place. The world's a dangerous place, always has been, always will be. You know, the hounds of hell are always dominating the species of hatred and fear and envy and resentment. But thank God we've got moments of interruption. That's what love is all about. That's what justice is all about. And you know how fragile any democratic experiment is. And the question becomes, how do we try to preserve the best of it? And I think I can find some common ground with that white brother, even if we ended first talking about sports and music a little bit, or maybe talked about his mama and I tell him about mine, so we can make a genuine connection. But then the political discussion would begin. But if they came in and said, well, I'm a Marxist and I'm a radical, well, no, first I'm my mama's child and daddy's kid, just like you. Then they say, oh, I hear you're a Christian. You're a Christian. You couldn't be a Marxist. Well, I'm the kind of Christian that believes that a critique of capitalism is very important, but Marx is wrong on a lot of things. And I believe the Marxist critique of Christianity needs to be listened to because we Christians have done some vicious things in the world, especially against Jews, against Muslims, against Turks, against gays and lesbian and women. And the Klan has done some vicious things in the name of Christianity against my Black folk themselves. So I think there's a way in which I can make that connection, my brother.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, in part because your humanity comes across and the sincerity of your person-to-person connection comes across. And I don't think anybody can listen to you and read you and not see that there's someone, a loving, generous, open-minded, sincere person on the other side of the conversation. A sincere person, I'm going to have to just tell you, I was trained in economics at MIT in the 1970s. I was influenced by the Reagan Revolution and all of that. I have gone left and I have gone right. But at the end of the day, I come out very friendly to capitalism. I had a debate with, you may know him, Richard Wolff. You know Richard Wolff, the economist?
Oh, I know Brother Rick Wolff. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, you have a treat in store, Cornel, if I may just say this. My lovely wife, whom we met at the beginning of this conversation, moderated. Richard Wolff and I stood toe-to-toe for an hour. Resolved, capitalism is superior to socialism as a way of organizing the economy. I had the affirmative. Okay. And we went back and forth and we went back and forth. And I basically said, and I'm going to just say this to you and I invite your reaction. I say, we look at the history of the world in the last couple of 100 years. And we ask, how do we become so rich and prosperous? How did we come to live so long? Why is modern dentistry and medicine what it is? How did we increase the caloric intake of billions of people in the course of human development from near starvation to something where they prosper? Where did our great cities come from? How is it that the scientific knowledge has been created, et cetera? And we ask the role that capitalism played in that, warts and all. I would say it's a plus. I'd say if you look at the history of the 20th century and you ask where socialism has been imported into developing world and whatnot, the track record is very spotty. I'd say as soon as the Eastern European countries got a chance to make choices about how they were going to organize their economic activity, they moved in the direction of a free market and open exchange and profit-seeking activity and private enterprise and private property and so on and so forth. And I just say I think the jury is in, not that we shouldn't have housing, healthcare, food for hungry people, support for needy families, not that, but that the basic bedrock principles of social and economic organization that are grounded in ideas about the free market is just the superior, has been shown historically to be a superior way of organizing our activity. So, that's where I would kind of come out.
Well, I hear what you're saying, though. It does remind me of the debate that my dear brother Robert George, my dear brother Robbie, we have when we teach Hayek's classic Road to Serfdom in our class. Because he makes very, very strong arguments, you do, for the market and for capitalism and so forth. And I argue that there's more than one road to serfdom. See, that certainly highly centralized forms of bureaucracies in the economy make it difficult to generate levels of technological innovation and unpredictable scientific breakthroughs, so that Hayek and others are right when it comes to highly centralized governmental forms. But and I know, when you look at capitalism in the last 100 years or so, you're primarily talking about monopolies and oligopolies. A lot of the breakthroughs that you're talking about have to do with highly centralized forms of power and authority in the economy. And they can lead to forms of serfdom too. So that free market is not a question of entrepreneurial activity in the middle ranges, but we're talking about huge global conglomerates that have the same authoritarian potential that the states did when Hayek was talking. And Brother Robbie said, yes, I'm with you there Brother West, and I would think you would be highly suspicious of deeply centralized forms in the economy that make it difficult for free markets to ever exist, because they're no longer free. They've always already been dominated by these oligopolies. And I think you would also agree that if it leads toward the destruction of the planet because the corporate greed tied to fossil fuel conglomerates don't make it possible for us to have climate change policy, don't make it possible for us to somehow arrest the development that's leading toward the ecological collapse. Or another way of looking at it is, if it leads toward more Hiroshimas, more Nagasaki's, possibilities of nuclear holocaust, which are tied to scientific innovation and breakthrough as well, then we've got to be honest about both sides of this debate. And that's why, for me, I'm suspicious of both centralized forms across the board. I've always been a decentralizing kind of person when it comes to centralized power, be it in the economy, be it in the state. But I should stop there and tell me what you think.
Yeah, I want to talk about climate for a minute. I had Steve Koonin, who's a physicist at NYU, who's a climate skeptic. I guess you can call him that. He's a very smart guy, served in the Obama administration in the energy department at a high level, studied with some of the great physicists at Caltech and whatnot. He's a serious guy. He's written a book, I guess, Unsettled, the title of the book, and then it has a subtitle. And basically his argument is the science is not settled on climate, that the models are sketchy, that there are a lot of factors that are hard to quantify, and that, and I hope not to do a disservice to his position, the apocalyptic vision that if we don't turn back, humanity be doomed is not to be trusted. It's not a scientific, it's almost a spiritual claim, not a scientific claim. He also emphasizes that, we sit here, I'm not sure where you are right now, maybe, are you on the West Coast?
Yeah, LA, yeah.
You're in LA, I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, in the shadow of Boston, Massachusetts. We're rich, we're fat, we're powerful, we get on airplanes and fly wherever we want to, turn the air conditioner on and off anytime, get in our BMW. I drive a BMW, I don't know what you drive.
Rent a car, brother. You go right ahead, go right ahead.
And if you go to India where they got, 1.8 billion people or whatever the number is, you go to China where they got 1.5 billion people, you go to a lot of places in Southeast Asia, in Africa, et cetera, even in Southeast Europe, where development is not at the level that we have enjoyed. And we ask, how are they going to get there? Get there being to a nature and a quality of life comparable to what we take for granted in Northern Europe and in North America and whatnot. It's going to be through fossil fuels. There's not any other path for them. This is Koonin. I'm summarizing. I'm trying to make this point. The point I'm trying to make, we were talking about capitalism,
right,
and socialism, is that when state power gets deployed on behalf of the allocation of economic resources in the service of ideology, the consequences can be really quite dire. And I want to put this question to you directly. I asked my friend Ernesto Cortez, the community organizer,
my dear
great
brother.
man,
my dear brother,
a great man,
yes,
and Saul Alinsky, Acolyte, Industrial
That's
Areas Foundation, Texas, California, great man. And I said to him, I hope he won't get mad at me for telling this. I said, how is somebody who's on behalf of the working class, I'm talking about the guys that dig holes in women with their bare hands, who work on pipelines, who work in trucking, who work, who are working class people who depend upon a vital economy to keep them going. You shut down fossil fuels, how's that guy going to get a bread on the table, or gal? How are they going to achieve their life's dreams? So isn't there something in conflict, even within the left? I mean, I'm trying to understand this climate enthusiasm, because it seems to cut against a working class ethos. It seems to undercut the blue collar to a great degree. People talk about solar and wind, and they talk breezily. They talk about, well, people get reallocated to other jobs and so forth and so on. But on the ground in Akron, Ohio, and on the ground in Galveston, Texas, and so forth and so on, there's some real conflicts here. So that was a long-winded way of me saying, I'm not sure all of the different elements on your menu of reform are coherently aligned with one another.
Yeah, and I do take that, but you see where I was going at you in terms of when you prematurely, uh, I think, decide that the trajectory of capitalist development, because of all of the breakthroughs that you talked about, innovation, medicine, and so on. Of course, I grant you that. I wish it was more readily available to the masses, but certainly it was discovered under the aegis of capital. I agree with that. I would never deny the scientific innovation and the technological innovation that has been part and parcel of the logic, the market logic of capitalism. The problem is that one, you've got the issue of distribution. I know you studied with dear Robert. What's Robert? Solo.
Yeah, Robert Solo was my advisor.
Solo. I mean, he's a towering figure. You talked about distribution in your dissertation.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
Oh, brother, I've been reading you for decades, man.
Oh, my man. Thank you.
For decades, brother. But I mean, but it's the distribution of it. 3 individuals have wealth equivalent to 160 million, one half the U.S. population. 1% of the population has wealth equivalent to 90% of fellow citizens. That's worse than under the monarchs and the suzerains in pre-modern times. You see, so that, yes, that innovation is important, but even when we go to our working brothers and sisters who we love so dearly, seriously, short term versus long term, if we can show that ecological catastrophe is real and fossil fuel is one factor among others, are you willing to still opt for jobs tied to that, knowing in the long term your grandkids will have no planet at all, or if they do, it's going to be so chaotic with struggles of water in the face of overwhelming pollution and so forth and so on? You go to the working brothers and sisters, we go to the barbershop and the beauty salon and say, look, y'all, we're going to get Socratic up in here. We're going to tell you the relation between now and the future. And I know you are as rational in your capacity, if you cultivate it, as people at MIT and Harvard. We know we can present evidence to you. We know you have deep concerns about your great grandkids and your grandkids, and not simply about your job right now at this moment. The problem with profit maximizing in capitalism is, in the last 50 years, it's obsessed with short term, brother. That's what private equity is about. That's what hedge fund is all about. We want the money now. What about the long term consequences? No. I mean, that Bentham turns over in his grave as the founder of utilitarianism. He had a temporal dimension to utilitarianism. It wasn't just right now, immediate pleasure.
Okay, I'm just going.
And John Stuart Mill refined it. These days with the market, it's right now. I want my money. It's like CEO salaries. That's part of it. They get that money right. Well, what about the long term?
Okay, we lost Cornel, but he'll be back. You made the point that working people could be persuaded that the climate issue was a serious issue, and if so, they might be willing to give up something on the economic front.
Right.
And you say the problem with capitalism and profit seeking is that it's a short-term oriented focus, and
that's right.
They don't take these things properly into account.
That's exactly right. And there's another way of saying that the moral and spiritual dimension of character formation, of virtues, of concerns about sympathy for others and empathy for others are always afterthoughts, if at all, in the capitalist calculation. That is a devastating indictment, even given the scientific innovation that you associated with, and rightly so. I do agree with you on that front.
What does Robbie say when you confront he and Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom and all that with the moral deficits of the profit-oriented model of economics?
Yeah, no, our dear brother Robbie brings in that very rich Catholic social teachings tradition and says, I am as committed to virtue formation. I am as committed to soul craft. I am as much committed to the virtues as I am market. And so you get this fascinating a double commitment. And I think in many ways, you would agree, because you are as moral and decent and concerned about human suffering as anybody else. And you would admit that the market logic of capitalism, it can be used in such a way that it hits poverty head on. But the logic in and of itself requires some kind of added moral and spiritual dimension for us to be able to create any kind of wholesale society. You'd agree with that, though, right?
Of course, I agree with that. The profiteering and the consumer of mania and whatnot can be
Absolutely.
soul killing. It can
Absolutely.
undermine the very foundation of a decent and dignified life. And we owe ourselves to keep the eye on the spiritual ball as well as on the material
Precisely.
ball. I would say those kind of things. And I would say, actually, since we are talking in this vein, that some of the problems of the low-income urban African-American community are spiritual problems, not just problems of a deficit of economic resources.
There's no doubt about that. No doubt.
And unless we find a way of reaching people at that level, at a level of what's the meaning of life, what is a dignified life, what do I owe to my children, to my ancestors, to myself, who and whose am I? If we just throw money at them, we're not necessarily going to solve that problem either.
That's exact. But see, part of the richness of the legacy of Martin King was that he understood that the revolution he was calling for, and every revolution in the end has to do with some substantive sharing of resources, sharing of duties, sharing of wealth, sharing of dignity. But there's always a spiritual and a moral dimension that has to be addressed independent simply of the political and economic one. And that's why I've always called for a spiritual renaissance, a moral reawakening, and a radical redistribution of wealth downward that takes the form of ensuring that rights and liberties are protected. I'm very much a libertarian, as you know. Those kind of majoritarian institutions that protect rights and liberties are requisite for any decent society. But I'm going tooth and nail at these monopolies and oligopolies, and I'm going tooth and nail at the military-industrial complex with its militarism abroad.
Okay, let's talk politics a little bit. How are you going to get on the ballot?
Well, as you know, I'm on the Green Party now, so we already got nearly 20, and we can get another 21 or so as I undergo that Green Party nomination. And the Green Party usually has a candidate who is on about 47 states, 48 states. And so
do you have to contend for the Green Party nomination?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a process, very much so. But I'm glad to be a part of that nominating process.
I know you've heard the criticism, third-party candidacy, it just draws support away from the milquetoast Democrats that you use. But after all, even a milquetoast Democrat is better than, the other alternatives, say these critics. And they remember Ralph Nader 2000 and all of that. And they want to know what's your plan, what's your long-term plan in terms of the weighty election and the role that you might play in it, even if you're successful in securing the Green Party nomination, and even if you attract a non-trivial amount of support, the chances that you would prevail in the electoral process are slim, but the consequences of your effort could be very, very significant. How do you answer that?
Well, one is that, I just refuse to presuppose the given as the inevitable and the necessary. That if you think that American politics will forever be the oscillation between Republicans and Democrats, then any attempt to break out is viewed as being a spoiler. Now, I think that's an unfortunate term, that when you actually look at Al Gore, he didn't even carry his own congressional district of Tennessee. He didn't carry Arkansas. And he could have actually fought when it went to the Supreme Court. He refused to fight. You might remember that when Jesse Jackson Jr. and the caucus tried to convince him to follow through. The idea of putting that on somebody who received such few votes relative to the two parties, to me, is simply a rationalization. They say the same thing about Sister Jill Stein. She got 1% of the votes, but she receives full responsibility for why Hillary Clinton lost. No, Hillary lost. She was a mediocre candidate. She didn't go to West Virginia. She called ordinary Americans deplorables and irredeemables, and therefore she did not win. It wasn't because of Jill Stein. You see what I mean? So I don't like that kind of framework. I do think there has to be some very practical reflections and practical judgments, not just Machiavellian ones that have to do with numbers, but also practical ones in terms of the impact of various administrations on people. And to me, that is a factor, but it's not the sole factor. It's not the sole factor. Not at all. And so you just have to be ready to get hit with all kinds of bows and arrows, my brother. Some of them are strong and you learn from them, and some of them are just empty and false and pseudo because people are trying to foreclose any broader discussion. I'm convinced the two-party system, the two parties in place, do not speak to the basic needs of poor and working people. Now, if that's the case, and I'm committed to poor and working people, I got to follow my call.
I respect that. I gather that you're not expecting an endorsement from former President Barack Obama as you seek to become the second African-American elected to that high office.
Did you hear what he said yesterday, though? God bless
About Tim Scott?
Oh, Lord. Tim Scott better have a plan to hit transgenerational poverty and deal with racial inequality. He got to walk the walk and talk the talk. What a self-criticism. What a self-indictment. Dabba Smiley and I had a poverty tour twice trying to get him to use the word poverty. And we were trashed by the White House folk. We also tried to raise issues of mass incarceration, raise the issues of the poor in barrios and reservations, pushed aside, viewed as traitors, and now he's going to say exactly the same thing about Brother Tim Scott. Come on, Brother Barack. Now, we were born that night, but not last night, man. Jesus.
So you credit then indirectly in your criticism of the president's most recent remarks, the sincerity of Tim Scott in representing himself as somebody who seeks the betterment not only of the country, but also of Black people in particular, and who genuinely believes that his, more or less friendly to free market and self-reliance and pulling up your bootstraps and all of that is if not always correct, at least honest.
Oh, no doubt about that. I mean, Brother Tim Scott is like members of Shiloh Baptist Church where I grew up, man. That he wants to do the right thing. He's a bona fide conservative Black brother. And so he looks at the lens in that way. He's got to talk about opportunity zones. Opportunity zones have their role. They have their place. Now, when I say role and have their place, there's a role for small businesses. There's a role for entrepreneurial activity, even in my much more so-called leftist project. We're not talking about eliminating businesses and allowing business opportunities for folks. Same would be true in terms of providing resources for civic institutions that need to be sustained. So that my critique of Tim Scott in some ways is the same as my critique of Clarence Thomas. That both of them aesthetically are beautiful Black brothers. They look like cousins of mine. I think they're wrong about 95% of the time, but I do think they're sincere.
Yeah, I will acknowledge here for the record, full disclosure, that I have recently defended Justice Thomas in remarks that I've made publicly, not in the context of these allegations of his inappropriate acceptance of gifts and so on, which I think, is an argument and certainly is not a good look. Though I don't believe that the justice is corrupt. I'll just say this I'm not asking you to endorse this point of view, but my main point was, this is an African-American whose life and whose career and whose work on behalf of the country, offered sincerely from his point of view, which he gets to have, and being Black doesn't mean he can't have that view.
That's right.
Deserves to be respected in that light. I mean, you don't have to agree with his jurisprudence to acknowledge that he is an authentic representative of the experience of our people. I speak of African Americans in this country, and the vilification, the denigration, the character assassination, a talking head, I won't name him because I don't want to, on CBS, when Kavanaugh was being contested, the nomination said, if Kavanaugh is confirmed, we'll end up with 2 sexual predators on the U.S. Supreme Court. Said that in 2018, 2019, whenever that Kavanaugh thing was going on. And I thought, come on, you're gonna relegate Clarence Thomas to the category of sexual predator because of the dispute with Anita Hill 30 years ago? You're gonna do this to this fine American, this fine African American who's conservative. And yes, you can argue with his conservatism, but don't do that So anyway, thank you for letting me say that.
No. I'm glad to get that out. I mean, Brother Clarence has always been my political foe and my ideological enemy. There's no doubt about that. But I can still stay in contact with his humanity. I can be concerned about his loved ones and family, and we clash. And people say, "Oh, Brother West, he just pushed through legislation that's taking back the rights of women." I say, I know. That's why I hit the streets. That's why I defend reproductive rights and so forth and so on. But he is deeply a sincere right-wing brother. There's just no doubt about that. And that's part of the clash. And that's something we've always had that in the history of not just Black America, but in the country as a whole. But within the Black community, we've always had conservative folk. They've been part of the community, and they're part of the all the Black networks, and we go at it ideologically and politically. No doubt.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. You mentioned the possibility of nuclear war.
Yeah.
I'm watching what's going on in the conflict in Europe, Ukraine, Russia, and NATO, and the United States, and I'm just concerned. I'm concerned that we're on a slippery slope to something that is not such a great thing.
Absolutely.
And I wonder how you parse it. Are you following the ins and outs of all of its complicated machinations of post-Soviet history in Eastern Europe and the nature of this conflict, Ukraine? Do you agree that Putin has ambitions that extend beyond the Donbass region, and that could conceivably end up with him aggressing against the Baltic states or Poland or whatever, and that we have to make a stance here? Are you comfortable with the billions of dollars that we are providing to fuel this conflict? And are you happy about the openness of the debate and discussion that we might hope to have here in this country about this conflict? And I'll stop talking because you're the one who's being interviewed, but I'm inviting you to reflect on that.
I hear you. No, indeed. Part of the problem here is that we need that we need a broad-ranging, robust, truth-seeking conversation about both the background and context as well as the present moment. You know, and I know that Gorbachev is a towering figure in the 20th century, that he was promised that NATO would not move 1 inch. Now, he agrees even with the right-wing xenophobic elites in the Russian Empire. That was a consensus among the Russian elites that the collapse of the Soviet Empire would mean that NATO would not move 1 inch. Why? Because NATO has been an instrument of U.S. global power. There's just no doubt about that. Now, when you look at the present moment and you move forward a few decades, what do you see? 14 former Soviet countries, part of NATO, right on the border of the wounded Russian Empire with its shrinking economy and its insecure elites. Now, United States is an empire too, that we talk. If there were missiles in Mexico, missiles in California, Russian missiles, the United States would blow them to smithereens the same day because empires behave that way. Now, if I say that on television, they say, Brother West, you're anti-American. No, I'm not. Not at all. I'm trying to tell the truth about how empires behave. And therefore, the extension and expansion of NATO was a kind of provocation. It's not the only factor that explains, but it was a kind of provocation. And the juxtaposition between the U.S. empire, which is the mightiest empire in the history of the world, and the wounded Russian Empire, there's no equivalency there, but I keep track of the imperial ends and aims of both. And I'm in deep solidarity with the suffering of my precious Ukrainian brothers and sisters who are caught in the middle of this proxy war between the U.S. empire and the Russian Empire. And As it escalates, it is a road to nuclear exchange and Holocaust. And I am, like you, very, very much concerned. But we don't have enough self-criticism in the U.S. press about the United States reneging on its promise.
Yeah, they're beginning to be some people talking about that. I've been,
You
listening
saw the
here and
Harper's
there.
Magazine piece of Brother Benjamin Schwartz and the other who tried to lay this out. It was a very courageous piece because, of course, when you say or do something like that, people think you're downplaying the plight of Ukrainians, or people think that somehow you are just a talking head for Putin. You say, no, no, no. We keep track of a critique of both. And this is what's difficult. But same is true, in the Middle East, right? We've seen this over and over again. How do we convince folk that we're committed to Jewish humanity, Jewish security, and at the same time, we're committed to Palestinian dignity and justice for the Palestinians? And you try to engage in a dialogue, and lo and behold, the name calling point comes up, and it's hard to keep track of the suffering. West Bank, Gaza, occupation, domination. Must be anti-Semitic. No, no, not at all. Not at all. I'm trying to be consistent. I would say exactly the same thing if there was a Jewish occupation and if there was a Palestinian occupation and domination of precious Jewish brothers and sisters. I'd have the same moral stance, same spiritual stance of being in solidarity with Jews. Both groups, Jews and Palestinians, often feel as if they're in the world all alone, abandoned. Nobody cares. That's like being in Mississippi, American apartheid, black folk catching hair. Chaos. Who really cares? It's hard to find a whole lot of folk. You always had a slice of white folk, but small. But that sense of being abandoned, what does that do? It reinforces paranoia. It reinforces distrust. And part of our aim, I think, as human beings, is to let folk know anytime you feel abandoned, there are people who care.
Cornel, do you think Palestinians should acknowledge the request from Israelis that they recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state?
I don't think that the vast majority can do that because it means then a denial of their own ancestors because they can't return. The Jewish brothers and sisters from Peru or Argentina can return. So it would be a denial of their ancestors' presence in the 750,000 who were pushed out. I think what needs to be asked of our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters as they are freed from occupation and domination is a fundamental commitment to Jewish security. See, there should never, ever be a massacre, a mass massacre of Jewish brothers and sisters, given the 2,000 years of the treatment of our brothers, Jewish brothers and sisters. Jewish security. Now, Jewish security is different than having a Jewish state. Now, if folks say, well, there'll never be Jewish security without a Jewish state.
Correct. That's what they say.
Ooh, now because I think there's two non-negotiables here. The two non-negotiables are simultaneously Jewish security, Palestinian dignity. You got to have both simultaneously. And people say that's impossible. The only way we have Jewish security is a Jewish state, but the Jewish state is dominated and occupying Palestinians. So you never had the Palestinian dignity. Well, we have Palestinian dignity, but if the Palestinian dignity leads toward pushing Jews into the sea, that is as wrong as the former. So what do? Well, we got to be creative. Maybe we come up with what Belgium did and others. You have the binational federations with troops mediating and at the same time, both states being able to have the kind of apparatuses that they're able to walk with dignity and have their own policy and shape their own dignity. We have to get creative, but at least we have to be clear on what the non-negotiables are. And so the Jewish state, when I hear Brother Schumer say, Jewish state no matter what, no, you can't have a state that kills 551 Palestinian babies in 50 days and nobody can raise a moral voice because it makes them look like they're anti-Semitic. No. In the same way, the other way, you get Palestinians killing innocent Israelis, Palestinians talking about pushing Jews into the sea. No, no. There's got to be some way of coming up with Palestinians free of occupation and domination, and Jews feeling safe and secure so they don't have to worry about another Holocaust.
I'm not so sure of that. That is to say, I'm not so sure there such a way exists. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this question. I did join a delegation led by Walter Russell Mead of intellectuals and journalists that toured 3 years ago or so, and on the West Bank and in Israel proper.
What did those conditions look like, my brother?
Well, I came away thinking that the aging generation of Palestinian leaders, I'm not an expert, I want to make clear on that.
Sure.
We're out of touch. We talked to a Palestinian sociologist in Ramallah, who had done opinion surveys of the population, and the under 35 Palestinian population, man, they don't believe in the two-state solution at all. They are radicalized and they are alienated from this aging PLO leadership. They look to Hamas as the cutting edge of the expression of their political aspiration, and they're sullen and they are cornered, and the idea of the two-state solution, this is again impressionistic, I'm not an expert, seemed a very, very distant and theoretical idea in the context of the situation I was seeing on the ground. I visited a refugee settlement in Ramallah and so forth, and talked with some of the people on the street, and I also went to Gush Etzion. I went to one of the settlements built into a hillside in so-called occupied or disputed territories. Those people are dug in.
That's been the problem. See, the two-state solution had some saliency, 30 years ago with the expansion of the settlements now, 800,000 or so. All that land, for the most part, most of that land is taken. And so it pushes us into either a secular state or some creative federation. Because by federation, I mean, you still basically have one state. You just have different autonomous regions and so on. Because the two-state solution was missed. That opportunity is gone. It's gone. It's like, trying to act like you're making your breakthrough with Motown. No, I'm sorry, but you're a little late. You're a little late. The high moment of Motown is over. It's over.
So I see a kind of creeping, with keep the status quo going, kind of annexation as the historical direction that things are moving in. And, I don't see an easy way out. I just don't see it. I talk with moderate. These were not Likud. These were moderate Israeli politicians. And I asked them about Jewish Voices for Peace. They had complete contempt for Jewish Voices for Peace. Groveling, begging people to like Jews and whatnot, unconcerned about the security of them. We got a tiger by the tail over here, or whatever the right metaphor is. And we are damn sure not going to be on the short end of it. We got the upper hand. We're going to damn sure not going. You say one state, but
that's Jabotinsky, brother. You look Albert Einstein versus Jacob Jabotinsky. Now, Einstein and Martin Buber said we better learn how to coexist in an egalitarian way. Jabotinsky said no. We got it by the tail. We got to dominate. We got to subjugate. We got to even push back, kick them out. And right now, what happens in Israel, you got such a far, far right government now against Jewish women, now against Jewish gays, now against Jewish lesbians, Jewish trans, and against Jewish poor. So you're going to get an internal civil war within the state, and still haven't come to terms with the issue of Palestinian occupation and Palestinian second-class citizenship. So that this notion of you got to gravel and grab it by the tail, that's precisely the myopic orientation that comes back to haunt one.
They can't afford to be wrong about that. I'm now trying to channel what I can imagine some of the people I spoke with would say.
Sure.
We really got one shot here. It's easy for you to say. But if I'm wrong, if I lighten up and the Hamas forces do what they seem to be wanting to do, which is to push us into the sea, we're fighting for our lives and we don't have any place to go. So, sorry, I wish that there was a pretty way to manage this, but whatever, I'm not letting go.
Yeah, but if it means then the massive massacre of Palestinians, then it's clear that there was no substantive commitment to never again. It was only never again for us, as opposed to never again for anybody. And if that's the case, then you don't really have any moral and spiritual dimension. What you have is a tribalism that rightly is concerned about Jewish brothers and sisters. We must be committed to Jewish brothers and sisters, but you'll never get the security that you need and desire if you are occupying and dominating others. If there's one law of history, is that sooner or later you're going to reap what you sow when you're trying to dominate and occupy. That's not how you go about gaining your security.
All right, let me ask you about something else.
But I know we can go on, but I appreciate this time.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to ask you about the border. I want to ask you about what you would do to manage the fact that people are presenting themselves in large numbers, seeking a better life, seeking refuge at our border, and that the maintenance of an orderly handling of that situation is a huge challenge to every administration.
Absolutely.
And that I don't know if you agree with this, that the interest of the United States of America, rightly understood, certainly includes a acknowledgement of the humanitarian imperative of providing sanctuary.
Absolutely.
But does not do so in an unlimited fashion without regard to the consequences of that for our own citizens. And there has to be, I'm an economist, a trade-off. There has to be a balancing of the various competing interests. And I'm just wondering, quite apart from the partisanship, Greg Abbott wants to do this and Ron DeSantis wants to do that and Gavin Newsom wants to do the other and Bush did one thing and Trump did another thing, and Obama, et cetera. Quite apart from that, what would be the principle that would guide your approach to this very significant question for the future of our country?
Well, it's a very, very complicated issue. I think you've put it in very, very clear and lucid terms. On the one hand, I want to ensure that the United States is viewed as a place where people are welcome to come under certain conditions and requirements. So there's no such thing as just an open border, but we have to have a sense of welcome. Second, that each person who comes, whether they are meeting the criteria or not, are going to be treated with dignity. They're not going to be demonized. They're not going to be called rapists and criminals. They're not going to be called outside of their names, that they're human beings made in the image and likeness of a God that gives them a sanctity like anybody else. There has to be a comprehensive gathering of elites and leaders in a variety of different countries, not just Mexico and Central America. As you know, they come from other parts of the world. Because this is a global issue, there's got to be some global forum, with the United States being very clear that we're not in any way going to be antagonistic and hostile, but we do, in fact, have certain kind of conditions and certain kind of criteria. I would also want to be critical of any of those business elites who are bringing folk in for cheap labor in order to keep the wages down, because we do have to be committed to living wages for working people across the board in the United States. And that includes folk who have been here for a long time, because there are, in fact, some tensions of what you would call even trade-offs about bringing in precious folk who are then deployed as cheap labor in order to keep wages down, to make trade unions weaker and what have you. So we have to be honest. I don't think anybody has a definitive thing. I mean, Brother Obama was viewed as the deporter in chief because he actually deported more than a Republican president. I don't think anybody has a definitive answer here, but we got to be jazz-like. We got to sit down and learn and listen, let folk know there's always going to be certain conditions, but at the same time, we're fundamentally committed to treating folk with dignity, what you'd call sanctuary, not just with the churches, but also with me with public policy.
All right, Cornel, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate it. Maybe we can get you back again a little bit later on.
Anytime you call, I come running. You know that, brother. You know that.
I appreciate hearing that. I want people to know that they can like, comment, share about the Glenn Show. They can subscribe to the Glenn Show. There's nothing wrong with that. If you like the content, please give us your support. But my guest has been the great Cornel West, candidate for the Green Party nomination for President of the United States. Thank you so much, Cornel.
Salute you, my brother. God bless you,
All right.
and Sister Lawani, all of your family. Tell Brother McQuarter that he still loves Sondheim just like me.
I'll be sure to tell him that.
All right, though, brother. All right,
Take care
love you,
now.
though, man. Take good care.
Yeah, bye-bye.